Welcome, and thank you for joining us for PwC's Growing Your Business webinar series. Today's webinar is Cyberattacks on the Rise, Understanding the Cyber Ecosystem and How to Protect Your Business. In the next hour, we will discuss what assets your company should be protecting, what risks you should be considering, and how to focus your controls on what matters most. My name is Nicole Weiss, and I will be the host of today's webinar. Your guest speakers will be Jason Green and Ali Varshovy, who I will introduce shortly. Before we begin the session, we have a few reminders. To ensure you can hear today's webinar properly, please make sure the volume is turned up on your laptop as well as on the webinar console. At any point during the presentation, please feel free to submit a question by typing it into the Ask a Question window on the lower left-hand side of your screen and then hitting the Submit Question button. We will attempt to answer as many of your questions as possible. If you have trouble reading a particular slide at any point, feel free to access the Enlarge Slides feature located directly under the slide window. To print today's presentation, please click on the Download Files button and open the attachment. For technical issues you may be experiencing, hit F5 to refresh your screen. If you still have technical issues, click on the Help button at the bottom of your screen and use the Ask a Question feature to describe the problem. Your full participation in today's webinar qualifies you to receive one Continuing Professional Development or CPD credit. Please note, in order to receive the CPD credit, you must be present for the entire webinar and also respond in real time to several of the live polling questions that will appear on your screen throughout the session. When a slide with a polling question appears, you may select your answer by clicking on the button next to your choice. All polling questions and corresponding answers in summary form will be read aloud. If for any reason you cannot see the polling question, or if you are unable to provide your response to the polling question directly, you may also submit your answer via the Ask a Question box. Be certain to identify the polling question number you are answering and include your corresponding answer. Then click on the Submit Question button. That concludes our administrative announcements. Now let me introduce today's speakers. Jason Green is a director in PwC's Cyber Resilience team and leads PwC's response services, which include incident and crisis management, cyber investigations, business continuity management, and physical security. He has over 25 years of experience in different domains areas of security and is based in PwC's Toronto office. Jason's experience includes digital forensics and investigation, governance, risk and compliance, operational security, penetration testing, physical security, social engineering, and controls design and review. Ali Varshovy is a manager in PwC's Cyber Resilience and Privacy practice and is also based out of PwC's Toronto office. Ali leads Envision, an area of the team that includes cyber threat modeling, cyber preparedness assessment, and cyber attack and crisis simulation. He has more than 12 years of experience in different domains of information and cybersecurity and is experienced in cyber threat intelligence, modeling and assessment, as well as design of cybersecurity architecture for complex and large-scale organizations. Ali has a master's degree in computer science and has published several conference and journal papers on information and cybersecurity topics. Jason and Ali, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Jason Green, as Nicole says, and I'll be doing the first part of this session with you. So as Nicole has highlighted and per the agenda, we're first of all looking to identify how will you be protecting the assets of your company, how are we going to go around determining what risks need to be considered, and once we've done that, we'll try and establish how we focus controls on what actually means the most to you. But what I want to do first of all is open this up with an actual polling question, something that we'll elaborate on as we go through. So the first polling question up there is, why is cybersecurity actually important for your business? And we have several sort of options there, and let me talk around these. The potential liability or the exposure of your assets or your corporate information to the outside world. Just a core reduction of security risks, perhaps. Why should we be looking at those? Reputational damage, another area that is something that comes up quite consistently as being the primary driver. Or perhaps it's a client requirement. You provide a service to your clients or through third-party clients, and they have mandated that you must have appropriate controls in place. Or it's simply a revenue impact of sorts. You believe that without appropriate security in place, your revenue is going to be impacted somehow. And finally, the legal or regulatory requirement. You're actually mandated to put security in place. Now, all of these types of issues are very common, but we see a very diverse range of answers typically. And as we look at this right now, I'm seeing by the responses that it's a potential liability or exposure is the primary driver. And I'm hoping that through the course of the next sort of half an hour or so of our presentation, we can change potentially some of the thinking around that and let you understand a little bit more as to why there are other aspects you should be looking at and why certain factors there will come into play. So with that in mind, let us move on. So the first thing we want to talk about is considering risks. And the way we're going to do that is I'm going to give you a primer on cybersecurity itself, because there is some confusion sometimes about what that means. We hear the term frequently, but it's not always as well defined as we'd like it. And depending on who you ask, it can mean many different things to many different people. So the way that we look at it here at PwC is it's not just about information technology. It's not limited to just your enterprise or to the enterprise. In the connected world, we're now working at such a speed with so many different clients, supporting our vendors, and we're all interacting and depending on similar data flowing through a multitude of different channels. Also, the attack surface is no longer what it was. Security was always very simple in the past. There were the people trying to get in, and we were trying to prevent the data from getting out. And simple technology actually prevented that from happening. Things have evolved heavily since the growth of those connected channels and the way in which we do business has come to the fore. We're looking at things in a very different way now. Also, it's an outside-in view of the threats and the impacts facing the organization. It's not just a view from the inside as it used to be in the consideration of what some of those threats were. We have to look at it and look at cybersecurity as a vast expanse of digital issues. And finally, it's a shared sort of responsibility across the enterprise. It's no longer an IT problem. It's no longer just the sort of corporate security organization's problem. It's now moving into being a business problem, which requires input and support from every facet of your organization. So let's just move on, and now let me explain as to why. The world is much bigger than it used to be. As I've touched upon, it used to be a very simple matter of, you had your four walls. We were protecting our corporate data. We had our staff whose information we were trying to manage appropriately. And it was very simple technology-based organizational structure. But now, innovation itself, the way that we do business on a daily basis has changed dramatically. Services that are provided to our end users, to our partners, our vendors, our clients, our staff, are no longer just one-way channels. They're all interconnected and hyper-connected, meaning that the service that you provide as an organization is being relied upon by other clients or other companies to provide their services, and vice versa. Where you used to just provide direct services out to your clients, they've now got very complicated because you rely on third parties to help deliver your information, your product, your intellectual property to a variety of sort of end users and organizations. Also, the ecosystem itself is now all about open collaboration and trust. We all trust that when we use our services internally, our offices, or in our private lives, that the information is actually flowing in the right direction. Nobody is impacting it. And we're putting reliance on third parties that we know nothing about to actually carry our data and our information appropriately. And also one of the big challenges, there's a constant information flow. It's no longer about companies stopping work at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday and nothing much happening over the weekend. Data is being processed and churned, and your information is being leveraged, used, and moved around continuously. Now, these are all really great things for companies. They lead to innovation, creativity, and an easier way to go to market, but they can also cause some issues. These kind of technology advances actually make things potentially easier for third parties to try and gain access or to actually gain access to your information. They have broader attack vectors. They have a larger set of options to come to your business and try and gain information from it. Also, the adversaries are actually targeting those critical assets throughout this whole ecosystem. They're no longer just going to try and break into or get access to your organization via the perimeter, which was always the traditional model. They're now looking at ways to come via your end users' devices, your partners that you do business with, the distribution channel that your web system relies on. It's a lot different than it used to be. Also, data is distributed and dispersed. You would send a piece of data to a client or a partner, perhaps. That could be flowing through many systems all around the world. Services that you pay for or services that you provide, but they're not localized anymore. So you're now putting reliance into the hands of third parties for them to ensure that they are securing your organization's data appropriately. And you may not know about all the controls they have in place. And generally, the changing business drivers and threats are just creating more opportunities and more risks to your company. So let me push forward and talk a little bit about who your adversaries are and how we think of them here at PwC when we're considering who we're trying to protect or who we're trying to prevent having access to your information. So what we just put up now is our view of who the main adversaries now really are. And we've broken them down into 4 key areas. Starting at the top, actually, nation states. Not really a consideration historically, unless you're in the business of protecting nuclear missiles or something equally as governmental. Now, for a variety of different reasons, there's a potential for nation states to invoke or to create attacks against a multitude of different businesses for different reasons. The targets are different and the overall impacts will be potentially different. Reputational would be one of the sizable ones. Then we moved into organized crime. So historically, the threat actors, the people that were actually going to try and gain access to your data, were seen simply as opportunistic, potentially, or they were motivated for a variety of simplistic reasons, such as they were what was commonly termed as hackers, and they were doing it for reputational purposes. Organized crimes, folks have now determined that there is a lot of benefits and a lot of gains for them to come and get information from a variety of companies, and not just to have intellectual property advances and provisions out to their clients, the people that are paying them to do the work, but also so they can sell personal information in the ecosystem somewhere, so that they can gain competitive advantage over a localized matter, governmental perhaps, permits, things along those lines. Many different reasons. And then we have what we're terming as hacktivists. They're generally motivated a little bit more by ideological reasons. We've seen some instances of this over the last few years that have been publicized heavily in the media. Organizations such as Anonymous, for example, who support certain ideologies and who then work on behalf of people or organizations to disrupt certain factions. And so we break them down generally into these key areas. And now, with that in mind, I would like to just put forward another question, if I may. So what we'd like to ask here is, generally, based on your own organizational understanding and where security functions are operating, and my current definition there of the threat actors, where would you see which threat actor is going to be more of a concern to your business? Is it going to be the nation states, potentially governmental influences to try and disrupt your business or gain access from it? Organized crime, perhaps. And I should point out that all of these questions are more a little bit around the basis of what your business does, of course. Only certain type of threat actors are going to apply to certain types of businesses. But it's generally your perception we're trying to get an idea of. Hacktivists. Are you doing anything, or do you provide services that could be deemed controversial, ones that hacktivists or activists might come after? And the fourth point, actually, forgive me for missing that on the last slide, was insiders. So the insider threat. This could be people working for you, people who have worked for you, or people who have influence over any of your staff members, all of which could be deemed as sort of insiders. So currently, looking at the results of that, I see that sort of hacktivists seem to be the main one, and these are an interesting quantity as well, because they're not there's no way to understand the direction they're going to come from or why they're going to do it. It could be something you publish, something you write, or you could be part of a supply chain of an organization that happens to do something that they deem as controversial. So they're a very unknown quantity, and it's interesting to see these coming back as the largest concern from the folks here. So with that in mind, I just want to put some sort of considerations forward. And what we put up here is really the difference between the then and now. So historically, we'll skip through some of these, but historically, the scope of the challenge, the problem was always seen as your problem, inside your four walls. You would create a security perimeter around the data and your assets, usually historically plugging in technology to prevent it from going out to the rest of the world. But now, that it spans this interconnected and hyper-connected business ecosystem where we're all sending information on a 24/7 basis through third-party organizations, and that is becoming quite challenging. The governance itself was always IT operated. It was led by your IT folks. It was passed to them as being an area of their concern. Well, the reality is it's not. It's now a business matter where everybody should be accountable or is accountable. The threat actors aren't just one-offs anymore. They are, as we just discussed, potentially organized crime, activists, and folks like that. And the focus isn't just an external threat. We're not just trying to protect people from coming in. It could be people who work there intentionally or inadvertently providing access to the third parties. And the security risk is not a static one. It's constantly moving. Your risk appetite changes on a daily basis based upon what you're seeing out there from business partners and clients. There isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy anymore. We're having to look at assets, as Ali will go through momentarily. We're having to prioritize them. We're having to look at our risks and determine the way that we control things. And we're no longer just defending the perimeter at all. With multi-layered defense in place. We want to apply threat intelligence. We're looking at real-time detection, correlation of all your information so that you can make the most informed decisions and apply the most appropriate controls. And it's no longer just about prevention anymore. As we've put here, we focus now on prediction as well. Let's stop the event before it occurs as best we can, and prevention, detection, response, correction, recovery. These are all key elements that have equal weight within the cybersecurity world now. Information is also shared now, threat intelligence. You share it with other bodies so that we can all better get an understanding of where the threats come from, and we can then better address them. And finally, the risk management approach, it's no longer about just minimizing likelihood. The reality is breaches will happen. They may be minor, but they will happen. And it's the responsibility of the business to understand which ones are going to be acceptable to a degree, and what will they have in place to ensure that the impacts of those are minimized. So with that in mind, as a primer, I'm now going to hand it over to Ali Varshovi, who's going to walk you through what we're calling the cyber threat modeling, which is something we do very successfully, which will help you understand a little bit better around how to identify the risks and the assets to be protected.
Sure. So hello everyone, Ali here. As Jason mentioned, I'm going to walk you quickly through a kind of an effective way of addressing this challenge, given all the complexities that Jason has spoke about. So when you look at, I'm just going to push through the slide. So as Jason mentioned, cybersecurity is not about technology, just technology anymore. I think there is no denying that the complexity and severity of cyber attacks are on the rise, and that's against almost all the businesses of all sizes and all verticals. Today's cyber attacks are far-reaching, in terms of sophistication, and that's the fact that has promoted these threats into a board level, C-level concern, which demands attention from the business, top of the house. I don't want to, just conscious of the time, I don't want to go through all the elements of why technology is not just a concern of cybersecurity these days. I don't want to go through the methodology of an effective way of be more proactive managing the risk of cyber. So again, knowing the complexity of the challenge and sophistication behind the threats, we often find that organizations that only focus on IT and cybersecurity or the technical cybersecurity, they become totally reactive to the threats. Information security or cybersecurity teams, they just try to adapt to the changing threat landscape almost on a daily basis, because we see new attacks, we see new scenarios being executed by the cyber actors almost on a daily basis now. So what would be a kind of a better approach to simplify this challenge and try to be more proactive and also more effective in managing the risk of cyber? So I think that we think that the focus needs to be changed from the province of IT and security departments toward business. So as opposed to trying to protect against everything or the art of possible all at the same level of priority, it's better to step back and say, from the business perspective, let's understand what really matters to our businesses. What are the business services? What are the business strategies? What are the products from the business perspective that matters most to the organization? And as we identify those business drivers, then we can also think about all the functions or the critical functions that support those business priorities, and so people, processes, and technologies that come together to operate those functions. So as we go through that process, that's where we can identify the most important assets to the business. And when you think about it, as businesses go cyber, key assets or the critical assets to the business will be a combination of both tangible and intangible assets. I can give you examples. The assets that could be targeted or could be impacted by cyber criminals could be your information assets, client or customer data, employee information. These are your PIIs that everybody is aware of. We have technology information that could be used by the cyber criminals to get their foothold within the environment. These could be your privileged accesses that you have either to your own systems or systems of organizations or clients that you closely work with. Intellectual property is key for private companies. These are the product details. These are the algorithms, in-house software that you have built and you use for your day-to-day business operations. These could be your business plans for today or for future. These could also be your money assets or financial assets, and the way that you process those assets. These could be your trading transactions or money transfer transactions, or probably the most, I would say, critical asset to the business, especially in private companies and private businesses, would be the brand and reputation. So as all that information is identified and all those assets have been identified by first business, then we can combine that with the external threat intelligence, our understanding of who are the actors that could be active against the businesses that we are doing, what would be their motivations, what would be the targets that they would go after, and what would be the methods that they would use to get their foothold within our environment or organization, or trying to get access to our most valuable data. After putting all that information together, then we can go to the business and say, no, if these are the most valuable assets to the business, or if these are the most critical functions of the business, knowing these are the threats that could happen or could be manifested through the cyber presence of the organization, what are the scenarios that no matter most to the business? What are the threat scenarios that are relevant to our business? And here we are not talking about 100 different cyber threat scenarios. It would be top 7 or 10 very high risk and top priority cyber threat scenarios that you as a business and as an organization need to focus on. And that's where then you can start to apply all the technical information as to how the different types of attack methods can come together to execute each of the identified scenarios to hurt or impact the business. And then based on that, then you can also focus on the controls that could be effective in protecting against those attack methods that you have identified as part of this process. So basically, it will be a kind of a business-driven, intelligence-driven process to cybersecurity versus starting with IT, and then usually coming up with a long list of vulnerabilities, which will be confusing to both technical teams and cybersecurity teams, as well as the business. Now I'm going to put up another polling question, which the question is, what would be the primary driver of cybersecurity program within your business? Now, understanding that it's a challenge that is posed to the business, probably requires the attention from top of the house, not necessarily the information technology teams, but would like to get your perspective as to what would be the main driver for the cybersecurity program within the business. Is it your business leadership that will be accountable for that cybersecurity program? These are the owner of the company, CEO, or the board level engagement, enterprise risk function, dedicated cybersecurity function within the organization. It could be your broader information technology function, which will have the cybersecurity function integrated within it. It could be an audit function or any other type of drivers that you could think of. And the answer to the question could be different based on the vector or the sector of the business, or even the size of the business. There is no one-size-fits-all type of approach to cybersecurity, but what's most important is to make sure that we have the business engagement, and we also have a kind of across the board, across division engagement and involvement within cybersecurity as we try to come up with a holistic coverage from the cybersecurity perspective around the business to make sure that our business, as well as the most critical assets, are well protected. Just looking at some of the results, seems like information technology function is probably is selected as the most critical function within managing the risk of cybersecurity and also implementing a cybersecurity program. But what I'm seeing here as a positive is that the second in the list is the business leadership. What we see as a theme being changed, moving from traditional information security to modern cybersecurity programs, is the fact that business is now becoming more accountable for managing the risk of cyber, although IT will be responsible to supporting the business through that risk management process. Back to Jason.
Sure. Thanks, Ali. So, as Ali's just pointed out there are some interesting ways for us to address or for these problems to be addressed and for us to determine things. But the question we get after we've had these conversations with people and we've outlined the way to identify those assets and manage your risk is, what next? What do we do? How do we actually go around making this something that works in our organization? So we've just broken it down into 5 simple areas. First one, develop a cyber strategy, a security strategy. You now know what systems and assets you need to protect, but also understand what your compliance requirements are. Why is it you're having to protect these things? Is there any third-party drivers that involve sort of the strategy? And once you've got this in place, draft it, fund it, and actually make this thing work. Make a cybersecurity plan something that's achievable and realistic, not just a document that lives quietly in a filing cabinet somewhere, which is something we see all too often. Secondly, know your vulnerabilities. So once you've determined what you're controlling, how you're controlling it, and you have got sort of controls in place, think like the third parties that we talked about earlier. Think like the threat actors. Perform vulnerability assessments and penetration tests. Understand where the gaps are in your environment that may allow someone access to your data. And these aren't just your gaps. These could be a third-party organization's gaps. Make them go through the same process. Have a set of standards in place that ensures that your third-party contractors adhere to your security standards or provide you with standards that they do adhere to that you can agree with. Because you're responsible ultimately for your data, and just because a third party allows someone access to it, you will still be the ones who reputationally may be impacted or may ultimately hold responsibility for it. Then protect your organization, and this is really around you know what you've got to control and how to control it. Put in technologies and processes around identity and access management so you know who has access to what. Ultimately, we really want to get the right people having access to the right information in the right way. That's the goal. Make sure that is monitored. Make sure you know who's getting to what information and how. And security awareness training. I know this is a common one that's been around for a long time, but ultimately your users, the people that have access to your information, your systems at a core and fundamental business level, can become a soft perimeter security tool for you. If they're taught how to identify appropriately a potential security incident based upon the type of data or information they're dealing with, then they can make you aware of it a lot sooner and you can address the situation a lot simpler. Have a breach response plan. As we mentioned right at the top, it's no longer a matter of trying to stop everything. There will always be an attack that will get through of sorts. Maybe not in your information that you have within your four walls, but it could be somewhere along the supply chain or in that digital ecosystem. Have a crisis management plan, data recovery. Have the ability or connect with someone that has the ability to provide forensic and e-discovery practices and services to your organization. And have a communications plan. As we've all seen in the media in the last year, when there are significant breaches and issues, they become public very, very fast. Make sure that business leadership, public relations, your legal counsel are all aware of the actions that need to be taken should the worst actually happen. And this will help to minimize the impact overall. And finally, seek ongoing assurances. Have your environment audited. Have your internal audit function actually make it part of their mandate to look at the security aspects of the business, not necessarily through the technical state that it is in, but rather through the lens of business risk, what they're trying to protect, and using Ali's model, understanding all of the assets and facets that are associated with that. Have third parties perform the reviews, where you can place some reliance upon their effectiveness and their credentials, and use that as a business differentiator in the marketplace, that you do have third parties continuously looking at your security and cybersecurity state. And then compliance audits. These may be mandated, these may be required, but use them to your advantage. Where you have to perform an audit throughout your organization, then for compliance purposes, then use those accordingly. And so on the basis of that, we're now going to move over to Q&A. So, So what we're going to remind you is to use the Ask a Question box in your console, so you could submit any questions. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for your questions that we've received so far. We appreciate those. And we're just going to pull those up. So the first one, which is where would competitors fit in the matrix? So if we're going back to sort of talk about the threat actors, that's a very interesting question. I mean, competitors themselves, typically we have found, we have had to do some sort of breach response and incident response components where it's been perceived competitors. They don't fit neatly into the matrix because their vectors are sometimes obscured by the ways that they're trying to get in. So, for example, they may come through your insiders. They may actually offer financial gain to potentially a low-level employee or even somebody senior in the organization to provide information. They may well pay hacktivists to be disruptive in some way, shape, or form. Or, worst case, depending on what your line of business is, they could actually use organized crime to get through some of those vectors. So there's no one neat space that competitors fit in. I think they are more of the folks who may try and encourage any one of those threat actors to use their various skills or capabilities to get to you, to either disrupt or to get data out of your environment. Hopefully that addresses the question.
Yes, a few more questions are coming up.
So another one I'm looking at here right now, and thank you for this. What's the most obvious weaknesses that we see in private companies? It ranges depending on the actual size of the company and their business focus, but a lot of the time it's going back to having the IT organization being the drivers towards securing the business. The business is in the business of doing business. They're not necessarily focused on protecting their organization at the granular sorts of levels that we've been discussing. They're rather are happy to put it down towards the IT departments. And in fairness, nearly every IT department that we work with now, even if they're not a dedicated function, they have some very smart, very talented security people. But it does need the weighing in of the boards a lot of the time, or weighing in of the CEO, the leadership of the company. That's the vital bit. And that's where we see the greatest weakness. There's a little bit of disparity around who should be involved in making the decisions or designing the way in which the company is going to move forward and secure itself. So that's where we'd see right now a fundamental weakness, if I could say.
Seeing a question around if a hacker really wants to get into the system, can we really prevent it, given the stories like a Snowden? Well, the honest answer is no, and that's the message of cyber resiliency. So what we see as one of the themes that Jason walked us through is the fact that we can't just focus on prevention as the basis of cybersecurity these days. So that's basically the yesterday's approach. As we plan around preventing things that we could prevent against, we need also to be prepared for the things that we know that we will have, that they will happen. Some of the zero-day attacks, some of the advanced malware attacks, some of the attacks manifested through insiders having privileged access to the key systems or the key data are examples of things that we can prevent. But as we go with the business and we identify the scenarios that could hurt the business and could target our organization, then we can have a plan around how to effectively respond to those threats should they happen. So it's more around being prepared and being able to bounce back once those scenarios are executed against the environment.
Great. Thank you, Ali. So looking at the next question we've got here is how frequently do we recommend that audits are performed, and what are the triggers that will prompt those audits? So let's break that down a little bit. First of all, you've got two real components to audit. You have the formalized audits that an internal or external audit function would perform. Usually these are driven by sort of a business need, an annual audit to report to the board, to anyone involved. So that's one component, and that's fine. But when we sort of look at audits from a security perspective, if the organization has been constructed the right way from a cybersecurity prevention or management platform, we would recommend things like ongoing vulnerability and penetration audits or tests to determine how well the posture stands. And typically we see those ranging from anything being every quarter to every 6 months, depending on the risk appetite and investment desires of the organization. We also see more regulated sort of paperwork type audits. So just an audit of your controls environment being carried out continuously. These have been sort of evolving to be a very simplistic and direct audit program, just done by certain senior and middle management teams on even a monthly basis, taking just a small period of time up just to determine that certain controls are in place. Because the reality is you cannot audit all of your controls on such a regular basis, because there will be some deep technical ones, of course, and then there will be business ones. And it's finding the right balance of which ones that need to be audited more frequently is part of the key. And it's part of Ali's model as well, about how we sort of identify those risks, those threats, and what needs to be protected. When we're putting the controls in place with people, we're also helping them understand how often they need to be paying attention to them if they're manual or procedural controls that don't have automated alerts around them. So I hope that answers the question. I'm also going to take the next question, if I may, Ali.
Sure.
Somebody's asked here, how easy is it to obtain the IP address of a hacker that's accessed the company's systems? Well, in my world, and as mentioned by Nicole at the top, I actually run our breach response teams. Depending on their experience, it can be quite simple. Hackers who, I'll use that term broadly, of course, just for the purposes of this question. Hackers who are just drive-by hackers, doing it for motivational reasons such as demonstrating their skills, or opportunistically just determining that you have an easy access into an environment. They slip up quite a lot, and they actually will leave the IP addresses somewhere. Some of the principles we follow, basically, we state that every contact will actually leave a trace, and somehow somebody will leave something that will lead us back to them. Now, when we start moving up that list of threat actors, and we move into hacktivists, for example, and we move into organized crimes, they will use certain technologies and methods to mask their identity or to anonymize who they are, so that even if we obtain IP addresses, what typically happens is we find that they go back bouncing through several countries and several systems and just end up at a bit of a dead end. When that happens, we typically will work with the client that's been affected, their legal counsel, of course, and law enforcement, so that we can provide all of the evidence that we find and provide direction around how to obtain disclosure orders, so those third-party companies that have been masking the identities of the attackers have to actually reveal the information, and we push forward that way. Unfortunately, it's not a quick and simple process when we have to go down that road, but it is achievable, and we've been successful on many occasions.
Sure. I'm seeing a good question here about who are the most frequent adversaries. Well, that certainly depends to some extent to the type of the business or type of business operations that we are considering here. But the fact is, one of the trends that we're seeing these days is insiders becoming more and more relevant as one of the key actors behind cyber threat scenarios. And the fact is, when you look at the organizations, the maturity of most of the organization has significantly increased in the past few years. So the organizations are becoming very effective in defending their perimeter. So as the perimeter security becomes more mature and it becomes more strengthened, then we've seen the trend of cyber actors starting to collaborate and collide with insiders which already have privileged access to the environment to be able to get their foot within the environment or get their access to the most valuable data. So to simply answer the question, insider threat is one of the trends that we're seeing these days. And the fact is, defense against insider threat is extremely difficult because, again, these are the people who already have privileged access to the environment. Could be people directly working with you, could be your supply chain, could be the third parties that you trust them and you either share your data with them or you open their access to the environment. So insider threat managing the risk of insider threat requires its own strategy, and it requires its own planning, again, led by the business to understand who are the key supply chain providers or third parties that business relies on, or employees that are critical to the business or have access to key systems and key data and key assets of the business, and then have a strategy around managing the risk of those insiders.
Thanks, Ali. Looking down the list of questions is another one, which I shall take. If there is a breach, what are the first steps that a company should take? And that's a great question. Thank you for that. First thing is, and we'll go back to some of my earlier comments when we were presenting, have a plan. That's the very first thing. Make sure there is one in place and you know what needs to be done of sorts. Second thing is, a lot of the mistakes we see around breaches, mistakes is a bit of a broad word, but some of the steps that folks take that actually cause evidence to disappear is they react very quickly. So don't run around pulling plugs out of walls and shutting systems down. I know that seems counterintuitive, but if the third parties have access to your systems and they're in your environment, for example, by actually killing those connections straight away, the capture of evidence and the capture of data about who they are will disappear as well. One of our focuses from a technical perspective around a breach, and I'll talk momentarily about sort of the broader level of business as well, is our job is to come and help you sort of gather the evidence and analyze it, determine as best we can who did what to what information to what data, provide all of that to to yourselves, your clients, to your legal counsel as needed, and work with you to understand what the affected systems were. On the flip side of that is have that breach plan. Be able to have the right people around the table at the time of breach. It isn't just a technical problem. Again, it becomes a business problem. Have the risk people in the room. Make sure everybody knows what their role is, ranging from your IT technologists through to, could be business continuity. Have the PR people at the table as well, in case there's actually going to be a public relations issue, a media issue coming up. Have legal counsel. We always state that if you're going to be especially using third parties to come and help you do analysis and contain a breach, have it all done as best you can through your legal counsel, because legal privilege is then invoked in case a prosecution does come up. It makes things a lot easier. But as summarily, the first steps are do not panic. Do not start pulling cords out, and make sure the right people are available to address the situation for you. I think those are the key items.
And Jason, if I may add, well, one of the key factors that could contribute to being well prepared for the breaches as they happen is to, as you come up with your breach response or crisis response plans, make sure that you conduct your exercises around those plans on an ongoing basis. So one of the things that is usually overlooked within organizations is the fact that even if you have a very comprehensive plan, when breaches or incidents happen, you won't have enough time to go through those plans and find the right course of action. Those plans need to be exercised with the relevant people or the executives or the technical teams that will be involved in the course of a breach to respond to the incident prior to the events actually happening, to be able to react to the incidents and the breaches in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And another question that's just very closely linked to it, so I'm going to bring it up now, is how often should a company conduct employee training? So traditional model was always with hire new resources, and once a year, all the companies would have their resources sign off on the fact that they've read a security policy somewhere, They promise to adhere to that policy, and that's it. Occasionally there might be some compulsory basic training, sometimes electronically delivered, and they go through that, sometimes half-heartedly, and they'd be seen as compliant. But the reality is they don't actually understand how to deal with situations as they come up. Rather, they just understand what the policies usually of the company is around what they cannot do or what they should not do. And that is fine. So on the training front, what we recommend is looking at, as I mentioned before, looking at your sort of staff or your employees as potential perimeter security, sort of human perimeter security for your organization. If they better know how to identify an issue before it occurs, and not just a simple matter of don't click on an email, but actually understanding what this means throughout the business, if they do certain things, then they will make life much easier for either the technology people, if it still is, or the dedicated security team to address that security issue in a much leaner way, more efficiently, with less of an impact to the organization. So we say make it ongoing. Bake it into your ongoing processes that on a periodic basis you're going to display information, provide information to them, sit them in a 15-minute lunch and learn to just talk about the latest things that they should be looking for, and try and make it in a way that is interactive, in a way that gets their buy-in, gets them more comfortable with being part of this organization's sort of security posture. And we find that that's the most effective way of doing it.
Well, there's a question around the options when you don't have a dedicated resource for cybersecurity. So, well, the answer to this will be basically find the third parties that can help you to be more effective and more proactive in your cybersecurity planning, operations, and response. That depends on the size of the organization, the complexity of the business. So as you identify or understand the key business processes and functions that you want to protect, that's where then you can start to having a conversation with third-party providers, managed service providers, to be able to make sure that your business is well protected. So you don't necessarily need to have all the expertise in-house. To some extent, you need to train some of your technical people on the right approach or the right process to be able to contain and manage the risk, or reach out to the right third parties as they start to see the incidents or as the breaches happen. So again, the short answer is there are certain elements or multiple components to cybersecurity risk management. Around the planning, that's something that business needs to be accountable for, but around cybersecurity operations and response, if you don't have the expertise or the staff, there are third parties and managed service providers that you can use.
Okay, good answer. Let me take one of the other ones, because we were just talking about policies a moment ago, and somebody's asked a question. Are security policies still relevant? Short answer, yes. Slightly longer answer is that in the format that they have been seen in the last 5 years ago, we used to walk into organizations and see veritable tombs, an inch thick worth of paperwork that makes up the security policy. Those ones, not so much anymore, but mainly because although they are effective and they contain absolutely everything, they're very hard to consume. They're very challenging to be able to effectively implement throughout the organization at a manageable level. So policies still need to be there. They provide a number of things. First of all, they provide, at the broadest business level, a direction for the business to go in. The organization has said, or the leads and the leadership of the organization said, we want to protect our company via these policy statements. That gives the rest of the business the impetus to then go and find the right controls, be they technical, procedural, or business-driven in some way, controls to implement to make sure that the policy statements are effective, are in place. They drive the investment in certain components of security. They remove some of those investment barriers and they also ensure that the organization is looking at the most efficient way to implement the controls to meet it. So we genuinely believe, and we see it everywhere, policies still exist. They are becoming simpler, more prescriptive, more palatable, and essentially becoming more effective. So yes, security policies are still relevant.
Well, there is a question around technologies. They're asking specifically about firewalls, but I want to answer it in a broader sense, saying that in line with the changes to the threat landscape, technologies have also evolved. So make sure that as you plan for your technical cybersecurity defense systems, or as you reach out to your third parties or the managed service providers to ask about security controls, make sure that you ask the question of technologies that are available to you, because it's not just the traditional type of smart technologies that we tend to use in the past. Those technologies have also evolved. So you don't necessarily need to saturate your environment with a stack of smart technologies. There are technologies available these days that you can align with your cyber threat scenarios and business priorities, and you can cut the budget and cost that is usually a significant financial pressure on organizations based on smart technologies that these days are kind of tailored and customized to the new reality or the new challenge of cybersecurity threats. To the question specifically about firewalls, firewalls have evolved. It's not about traditional firewalls anymore. We have next generation firewalls that have a stack of technologies which with one small subscription or just using one specific device, you'll get a stack of controls as opposed to having multiple devices configured within your perimeter or inside the organization.
Okay. So I know we're coming up a little bit tight on time now, but I'm going to try and tackle one more question as best I can. Interesting question, one that comes up actually quite a bit with some of our clients. How does the risk profile of cloud computing compare with a company's own platform? There's a very broad answer to that. It's an extension of your organization. You are, as I mentioned in the presentation and our sort of previous discussion, you are going to place some reliance upon that cloud environment and the people that run that cloud, if we're presuming just a large sort of public outsourced cloud, to have suitable controls. And you are well within your rights to go and ask them for how they govern their environment. How do they control it? So the risk profile itself, shouldn't be seen any differently to yours, because it's not about the effectiveness of the cloud environment. It's about what you're trying to store in there and what controls you would implement in your own environment to protect it. If that cloud environment doesn't have those, then move on. Find another. There are different types of cloud environments as well. There's public ones, the Amazons and Googles of this world. Then there's hybrid clouds, private clouds, and the options are limitless. But it's all about ensuring they have the right set of controls that meet your criteria, not just generically everyone's. And a lot of the cloud companies now are actually providing the ability to tweak some of those controls to a degree to better suit your own purposes. So I would say a few years ago, it was a very broad conversation and they were all very much the same, but now they're actually focusing on applying the right levels of controls.
Okay, thank you, Ali and Jason. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our time in today's presentation. For those of you who submitted questions that we were unable to answer, please know that someone from our Private Company Services practice will respond to you directly by email. To view previous webinars from the Growing Your Business series, to learn more about PwC's Private Company Services practice, or to connect with one of our local business advisors, please visit our website, www.pwc.com/ca/private. As a reminder, if you had requested CPD credit and were part of the live webinar, you will receive your certificate via email following today's presentation. On behalf of PwC's Private Company Services Group, thank you again for joining us today.